Hey, I'm John,
And I'm Josh.
and this is Dungeon Brew, where we talk about all things homebrew.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
We have already talked about balancing encounters. Let's dive into the second pillar and discuss exploration. Now, I think a lot of DMs probably include this already in their games, but they aren't necessarily rewarding it, and maybe they aren't really utilizing it to its full potential. So, JC, if you'll dive into this for us, what is exploration? What do people mean when they're talking about the exploration pillar?
I mean, it's a relatively new idea in D&D, and the funny thing is that, these three pillars are really things that were in the older editions, even before, right? They didn't, you didn't need somebody to really tell you that exploration was a piece of gameplay in OD&D or BECME or anything like that. That being said, exploration is really it's really just the idea of going off the beaten path. It is the notion that if you are going from point A to point C and point B is off the beaten path, that you maybe go through point B as well. It's taking non-direct routes in order to get to your goals. Yeah, and you can see that in wilderness exploration, which is, I think, what people tend to think about is the idea of exploring the unknown in the wilderness. But it also occurs within the dungeon. It occurs in locations where you have, those larger dungeons that have a ton of rooms in them, and going through those rooms and seeing what exists there, exploring every corner of the dungeon and finding things that you wouldn't find if you were just interested in trying to get as fast as you could from the entrance to the exit.
It's interesting in thinking about it that way because I've had players that are relatively new or they've only played with a handful of DMs over the years, and you bring them into a dungeon and it's like they almost take a linear path to it. They just kick in the door and go running towards the end boss, or they have a goal that's given to them for like their overall mission, and they ignore every side quest, everything that's going on around them in order to accomplish that said main quest without worrying about the rest of it. So, give some examples, I guess, of how you've incorporated exploration or encouraged characters to explore those other side pieces and don't just, I guess, start barreling straight towards the end goal.
I think probably like the most obvious and maybe the easiest way of doing something like this is getting to the door that can't be picked and requires some special key to get through. So you can't get into the boss's chamber to defeat him until you go find the key or the ward stone or something like that. It forces players to explore. It forces them to go find that thing that allows them to progress. Now, I did that a lot when I was younger. I don't really do that so much anymore. I try to find other ways. It's not that it's a bad one, but it is a formula that eventually your players kind of key in on, and it becomes less and less exciting to go, but I need the key. But I need the key. We have got to go find the key again. It's not very exciting after a while. It's not bad to use every now and again, but I don't use it very much anymore.
So we used stuff like that before when we were younger, specifically around riddles or finding scraps of the riddle to bringing it back and piecing it together so that you could solve it. Or statues that are placed around the dungeon that need like all the swords turned upwards. You have to find all those statues in order to allow yourself in. It's the same type of concept, but it does kind of push players into a place to explore the dungeon.
Yeah, there are a variety of ways. The simple one is find the key for the door. The more complex versions can really be puzzles. They can really be something that is engaging if you do it correctly. And like what you're talking about, where it's like there are multiple things to interact with throughout the dungeon, and you have to find all of them in order to move forward. It doesn't really work so well, I feel like, in the scenario of go defeat the big bad bandit in his lair because it seems kind of forced. It makes a lot more sense in locations where it's like it's a lost temple that was locked away, and you're trying to navigate your way through it, and the priests who lived there had set up a series of riddles or a series of obstacles in your path in order to try and make sure that only the worthy were able to pass. Those types of scenarios definitely make a lot more sense than Bandit Chief has inexplicably set up this complex series of stuff in order for you to be able to get to him, because why would he do that? And why doesn't he just leave? So there's other pieces to it, but definitely that's kind of at the core of creating things in the dungeon, creating things in the wilderness even, that force the players into exploring. And even though you can take the route of forcing players into exploration, I find that it's far more interesting for me as a DM to find things that are hooks that encourage the players to encourage them to explore, but does not force them to do so. That they look at the scenario and go, I want to go see what's in that corner. I want to go see what's over there beyond the horizon, rather than, the DM has set up another series of puzzles. I guess I'm going to have to jump through hoops in order to be able to get to the end.
I have to say that there's a piece in there that you said that I want to highlight and reiterate how important it is to make sure that it fits within the world and the story being told. You've done this before, where we went into a temple like you've spoken about, and it was so intricate in how it built into the world's lore and the religion and the politics at the time, that it really added to the story and then supported other pillars within the game that allowed us to pursue those as well. It is kind of silly when you go into, a dungeon that's, I don't know, set up by a bugbear or something, and there's these intricate traps that are all woven throughout that don't make any sense for why the bugbear himself would have created something like that, and it would have fit better within like a bandit's hideout or something along those lines.
Right.
So I like the idea of
making sure that the dungeon, that the obstacles, that the exploration, that type of thing fit within the creation. And you can kind of get away with some of that, where it's like, you have this group of goblins who have nested in this dungeon, like this lair of some kind, but they are only using part of it, and there's another part of it that they don't go into because there are things in there that they're afraid of, which you guys ran into in the second layer of Mistamir, where the kobolds had taken over a part of that dungeon, and there was another part that had a large spider in there that they were afraid of, and so they were breeding beetles outside of its room to try and keep it contained so it had its own food source and they didn't have to deal with it. It was a way for them to live inside of a dangerous environment and use what they could use to prevent themselves from being consumed. But you would really only find that out if you actually explore the dungeon. You don't know about it. You don't know what treasures that spider has managed to amass over time, where it has, caught the unwary kobold or the unwary adventurer who happened to make it into its nest. And I feel like that maybe that's a good segue. That is the reward, or that is a potential reward of exploration, is finding things you wouldn't normally find unless you're willing to actually do that exploration.
Yeah, sometimes the magic items or, just the unique items that you find in those scenarios are well worth it. And if the DM rewards that, it encourages the players to continue to go and explore other areas.
Right. And that's definitely a thing that you just have to pay attention to in general. And it's, I don't know if it's something that we have gone into detail about before yet, but just in terms of, you reward the behavior that you want to see in your players, and that is, generally speaking, you offer experience, which is the meta version of reward, for the things you want them to do. If you want them to explore, reward exploration. Reward them for going through all the rooms in the dungeon. Reward them for finding secret passages and secret rooms. Reward them for trying to discover and then locating hidden or secret temples that nobody could find before. all of those things are ways that just on a meta level, the player comes to understand, if I really want to benefit from this, I should go explore more. And that is one of the most straightforward ways of saying, listen, let's make sure that these players, and by course the characters, understand the benefits of exploration.
Yeah, I was just thinking of the game that we play on Sundays currently with the Nordic campaign, where Giants Lie. You guys decided to go down the slimy hole into this underground temple that was buried away of this Jotun god lord, and you guys went in there, and I was really worried, honestly, as a DM, on whether or not you guys would really go down to explore it. But one of the pieces that I have woven into the game is that you guys are looking for rune stones in order to empower your weapons and your armor and your trinket. And without those, it's really hard for you to face off some of the baddies that exist in the world, because you need them. And so the draw is that there might be something down here that we really need or want that's going to help us in a future battle, that then, I guess, sends you down on the subquest to look down there, where otherwise many players look at that and go, yeah, there's no reason for me to go down there. That's just going to be instant death.
Right, and that creates an in-world reasoning for why you should explore. It also makes sense that it's like these rune stones are this kind of like ancient magic, and it only exists in the ancient places of the world. Like, if you really want to find them, and that's something that you instilled, I think, in like session 1, where we spoke with this ancient man who was working for one of the Jarls, and was like, hey, listen, I want these rune stones, and I'm going to give you the location. I'll pay you to go and try and find them. But they're in these old ruins, and, people who go there don't come back. And from the outset, it is obvious that if you want to be able to tap into that magic, you have to explore. It is not possible, really, to be, like, you can't find them in the market. It's not something where it's like you can just go into any town and try and buy runestones. They don't exist. They only exist if you explore.
We're talking a lot about scenarios, which I think are important, but there's also, in my mind, exploration and encounters that you also have to put together that kind of also fit the same build. I don't remember what campaign it was, because it's been so long, but you set up one years ago where we were going through a tunnel, and at the entryway was this great hall that had these pillars on either side, and there was pressure plates that were built all throughout it, and we had to walk through without hitting those pressure plates, or it released arrows or dropped rocks on us, or some other type of thing, for intricate traps that were built throughout it that allowed us to kind of use skill checks to get through there and really explore the area fully, to make sure that we were able to work our way through that temple area to get to the prize on the other side without being damaged. Are there other examples, I guess, of where you've used exploration in gameplay that way? That's not necessarily just exploring tunnels and the dungeon itself, but using exploration as a tactic just within encounters itself.
I'm trying to think. I definitely don't remember that specific campaign. It's been so long, and we've been playing for 20 years that who knows. But in terms of using exploration, I've gotten to the point where I no longer... I still include the random odd trap here and there that, it's like, oh, it's a tripwire, beware. But most often I find that when it comes to locks, when it comes to traps, I try to include other ways of doing it. Most puzzles, or most traps, are puzzles to one degree or another. Most locks, or not all locks, can simply be picked. I also like puzzle locks. And you're rewarded if you have done the exploration necessary. So when you guys were in Specularum in the Beckme campaign, you had access to get down into the sewers. You went through a temple, and then you went into the lower level of the temple, and then you wanted to get into the sewers, and there was a lock on that sewer. And the only way to know how to open the lock is if you have done enough exploration of the world in order to understand how you could open the lock, right? Because it was a dial lock, and it had a series of letters around the outside, and you had to spell the correct word. And if you didn't know what the word was, there was no way for you to open up that lock. When you guys, and in addition to that, there was more than one way to open the lock, right? If you put in one word, it would open the entrance to the sewer. If you put in a different word, it would open up a secret vault of treasure. And you you were rewarded for doing the appropriate exploration up until you got to that point. It's the same thing that happened toward the end of the campaign, where you guys were trying to defend a city from an invading army, right? And the invading army, you were rewarded for the connections, the exploration that you had done outside of just the core portions of the campaign. You went and recruited one of our players had recruited an elven follower, and because she had that elven follower, she could call upon the elves to come and assist. If she had, and the initial encounter there was you guys getting in a fight, and when you got in that fight, it was possible that you could have killed her to begin with, and she wouldn't have been there with you. You had explored off the beaten path so that our orc player could go in and recruit the tribe of orcs, and so you had a tribe of orcs to call upon in order to defend the city. There were a variety of ways where you guys had done various things throughout the campaign that you were not required to do. It was not part of the original portion that got you from point A to point B, and because you did them, you had resources to call upon that I viewed as rewards, basically, because you had chosen to explore. Which is kind of the macro level of doing that on a campaign-wide scale. But I know for you specifically, you've done really well with exploration encounters, particularly that one in Hawkhurst where we dealt with the guards.
Yeah, I really had a lot of fun developing that particular one because we were able to use the technology. We were using Roll20 at the time. Now we use Fantasy Grounds primarily. But Roll20 had some really nice features where I could put lighting on the guards in a cone shape that kind of like gave you their perception or their line of view. And so it was kind of a skill check, I guess, encounter in the way that it was built together, but it forced the party to move through the town, avoiding the view of the guards. It just greatly outnumbered them and overpowered them. So battle just was not an option.
Right.
You had to find your way through this very complex inner city of, going through homes and out back doors and secret paths and really exploring the area while avoiding the guards that were on patrol at the same time. And it was fascinating for me because, even in setting it up, I was like, I don't know how they're going to do this. Like, I'm excited to see how my players are going to explore this and handle this situation and use their own ingenuity to find their way from this side of the map to the other side of the map without being caught.
Yeah, the most fun encounters are usually encounters that, as a DM, you set up and you just have no idea how your players are ever going to make it through there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking of another example of you too in the Khazar Karath campaign that you did where we were fighting back the Slot invasion, and there was one piece in there where we came across like altars where there had to be a sacrifice given for a reward coming back, and it had to do with our understanding and knowledge of the particular god, what sacrifices were considered to be worthy enough, and those types of things too, which I've seen you use variations of that type of exploration piece in there too, where we have to go discover something and know something and then come across some sort of engaging thing in the dungeon. It's not combat, it's not role play, it has to do with how well did we explore before this point to be able to handle this device that's put in front of us.
Yeah, I really enjoy doing that type of thing where I try and pull on as much of the stuff that you had done before you got to the point where you needed it. Yeah, and I try and sprinkle that type of thing throughout.
Which I think is really good because a lot of DMs, they focus on skill checks in those instances. Oh, roll a religion check, see what you know. Oh, roll a whatever check, see what you know. Instead of rewarding the player for exploring beforehand to come up to that point and then receive the reward for the exploration that had been done. I really enjoy that piece of it's like, well, a religion check's not going to do it for you. You're going to have to go back and dig through the scrolls in the library in the city to figure out how to handle this thing. Or you're going to have to go talk to the leader of the church and see what information you can get out of them before you can come back to this point.
Right.
And
so
there's a lot of role to save you.
Yeah, and so it mixes in other types of encounters. It isn't just roll me a skill check, let's see what you know. It's you didn't do the exploration. So you either did the exploration necessary to like get to the points where you found the information necessary to get past this point, or you didn't do the exploration. The other route is not like just, battering down the door or doing whatever. It is now you need to go and engage in social encounters in order to be able to get into that. So it presents another option, which is not combat, which to me feels like a more fulfilling style of gameplay. It's not just let's beat down the door and kill everything inside. Which I play those games. I enjoy those games. I think for the most part what I grew up on, especially in 3.5, was very combat heavy type gameplay. But it is very one-dimensional. And I don't mind revisiting that. But at the same time, I very much enjoy trying to throw in as much exploration style stuff as I can. Currently, what I'm doing, like with the Cast Down from Haven, is that it's a very combat heavy style of game because I'm working on something else in the background, and so it's easier to prep that way. But what I've done is I'm encouraging exploration because you guys need resources. The only way that you really get cool magic items or the magic items you want is by accruing resources in order to be able to craft them yourselves. And when you get into dungeons, you get more resources for being thorough in your exploration of those dungeons than if you aren't. And you're encouraged to go from region to region because the only way to get additional resources is by going to various regions. So there's a lot of exploration that's natively built into that campaign. It's the only way that you really get the rewards that you truly want. If you didn't do those things, you wouldn't have the resources to get the magic items to be able to progress the campaign, basically.
A final point that I want, and again, this is reiterating something that I think that you're hinting at here too, is that character buy-in is important. We talked about that before. The type of game that you're creating is also important. And
right.
Every game, I think, has a different percentile of how much that pillar plays a part in the game. Maybe you're 40% combat, 30%, exploration, 30% social encounters. Maybe it's 60% combat and the other two don't have as much weight in what it is that you're doing. But understanding how much each one of those elements play a part in the game that you're creating is important. I personally think that every game should include all three to some degree.
Right.
It may be that some of the games that you're creating way in more one direction than the other. Which I've done ones that are very strongly, like dungeon diving campaigns that I've done, like the Bogwitch one.
Right.
You have to explore through all of it to find resources and find the exit and find the key and all of that.
It was almost entirely combat and exploration. There's very little social, which is similar to Cast Down from Haven. It's very combat and exploration based. The Khazar Karath one that I did and the Hawkhurst one that you did are both much higher on the social. There was a lot of political intrigue that existed in both of those games where you had to interact with a lot of what was going on in the Beckme campaign that I did, the Tales of Mistamir. That one also was very socially driven in a lot of ways in order for you to get the political connections because you guys were trying to overthrow one of the barons of one of the regions. So there's a variety of ways to approach gameplay. It's not necessary to always include, all three pillars of play to an equal degree, but it is being aware of where they fit and the type of game that you're setting out to play in order to ensure that, the players understand it as well. If you're going to run a political game, make sure your players understand that. They may not want to run, a brutish fighter that's very low, on mental stats and isn't able to engage with that style of play. It's not going to necessarily be fun for them versus, a combat heavy one where you have chosen to get a wizard who has chosen only practical spells that have no place in combat for the most part because they're not building their character that way. So all of those things kind of play in, character buy-in, where your pillars are going to be and that type of stuff, and all that kind of thing occurs hopefully in session 0 so that your players can have buy-in when they're building their characters.
Yeah, and don't build themselves a character that's completely useless during the
Right.
course.
Well, and I don't know that they're always useless, but it definitely makes a difference if you were, as a player, you're setting up to run a character that you have in mind before you get to the game, and then you realize, partway into the campaign that it's not the game you thought it was. It's like, I built this, I had this really cool concept for this warrior that I was going to run, but we've spent the last 2 sessions hanging out in the city dealing with political intrigue. They may not have as much fun with that if they haven't built a character that thrives in that environment. So,
Dungeon Brew.
Hey, thanks for hanging out with us today. Please check out some of the stuff we're doing. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, join us on our Discord, or go and watch us stream on Twitch where we're at 4 or 5 days a week. All the links are down below. We look forward to hearing from you.
Dungeon Brew.
Let's dive into the second pillar of adventuring, which is exploration. JC, you have...
I'm going to make you stop and start over because you were slouching in your chair and you have gotten to where your chin is at the bottom of the screen, basically.
Let's go ahead and dive into the second pillar of adventuring, which is encounters. Now, this is one that many DMs, I think, probably incorporate into their games, but they don't necessarily... What? Why are you laughing?
It's the second pillar is exploration.
Is that what I said?
You said encounters. You said the second pillar, which is encounters.
Now let's dive into the second pillar of adventuring in... I can't even remember. Can't remember exploration. I'm like encounters. God damn it. We have already talked about the importance of combat.
That's the wrong goddamn pipe.
Are we recording today or what?
Dungeon